Hey there, welcome to the Posit Data Science Hangout. I'm Libby Heron, and this is a recording of our weekly community call that happens every Thursday at 12 p.m. US Eastern Time. If you are not joining us live, you miss out on the amazing chat that's going on. So find the link in the description where you can add our call to your calendar and come hang out with the most supportive, friendly, and funny data community you'll ever experience. Can't wait to see you there. I think we can go ahead and introduce our featured leader for today, Nikolay Braykov, Manager of Advanced Analytics and Outcomes at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. Nikolay, it's so great to have you here today. Could you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about what you do, maybe a little bit about Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, and something you like to do for fun.
Hey everyone, good afternoon, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. So my name is Nikolai. I manage our data science team here at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. We are one of the largest pediatric health systems in the country, the largest in Georgia and one of the largest in the Southeast. So what my team does, we're part of a bigger data and analytics group, or we sort of sit alongside data and analytics under the IT part of the organization. And what my team does, we're officially called the Advanced Analytics team, but we provide essentially any kind of data science question that goes things that go beyond reporting. And there are, uh, most of our questions or problems revolve around healthcare quality or kind of clinical and operational questions. We're not a research team. We're very focused on kind of applied data science. And I'd say there's like three main pillars of what we do. The traditional kind of advanced analytics data science work is, as I said, anything that our reporting teams can handle in terms of like something requires more advanced data visualization, data wrangling it from different sources is needed, and then eventually you might have some hypothesis testing or some kind of statistical analysis that needs to get done. So that's where we come in. Um, the other pillar is machine learning and the evaluation and also the development of custom predictive models. Most of those are around clinical decision support, and so we partner closely with clinical informaticists. Those are the folks that can build things in our electronic health record. And the third pillar, this is a relatively new area, but we also develop custom solutions that might be powered by LLMs. So if there are any applications that sort of lean on large language models and do, for example, NLP kind of work, um, we would develop and support these.
Okay, what about something you like to do for fun?
Oh yeah, the fun part. So I love being outside. Atlanta's a very green city, so I live on the bike trail. I love going on long bike rides, and I've been trying to get into pickleball. Still new to it, but it's addictive. It's there's no other way of saying it. It's like so. It's easy to get into it and it's such a wonderful community. So that's been kind of my newer hobby. But yeah, I like to stay active and enjoy the outdoors. Unfortunately, this year I'm getting like allergies for the first time. It's like almost full-blown spring here, so but we're making the most of it.
I think you are not alone in pickleball. We have some pickleball fans in the chat, and I don't think you're alone in the allergy dread. It's been terrible here in South Texas. Um, it's been absolutely awful. My husband is dying currently. I'm trying to get him to take Zyrtec. It's been a struggle. Well, I wanted to remind everybody that the link to ask questions in Slido is there, and I am going to ask Nikolai to tell us a little bit about the tools that he uses and a couple of examples of problems that his team solves and types of data he sees so that we can ask good questions. So, Nikolai, can you talk a little bit about the tools that your team uses? Because I know that you are a polyglot team, and do work in both R and Python. Could you talk a little bit about all the tools that you use? Do you use notebooks? Are you working in scripts? Are you deploying things? How does it all work?
All of the above, and maybe just to get some context on how big is the team, who's on it.
Yeah, that would be
So
great.
we have three data scientists and one machine learning engineers. One machine learning engineer, we actually have an opening for another one. So if folks are interested, get in touch with me. The As far as like the tools we use and what we do, so a lot of the kind of origin of the team was more in biostats. So we're answering questions around statistical hypothesis testing and data visualization analysis. I think our data scientists were primarily R, and R is also my preferred language. That's in heavy combination with SQL, just because a lot of times we need to get data and transform it, and for some of the workloads that we have, it's easier to do that when we directly interact with databases. So R and SQL for the data analysis, wrangling, visualization parts. Um, so if we're having like a lot of ad hoc questions around something, for example, we might be asked to evaluate if a certain intervention has worked, right? So we would do some kind of observational study, but think of this more as like quality improvement. So it's not exactly your biostats research kind of work, but it's still using a lot of the same tools and packages in R. Like we love, for example, using GT summary and making bivariable tables. We do a lot of that work in R Markdown and Quarto. Um, so um, I've been a big fan of R Markdown and now Quarto actually for since the start of my career because it's just so great to have that type of notebook where you can actually create very polished output, make everything reproducible. So I'd say that's, the basic building block of a lot of what we do, whether it's data exploration for some bigger project or predictive model, or there's always a notebook, and that notebook tends to be in Quarto these days. So we also develop Shiny dashboards for certain use cases where you need to interact with data. So one example of a project that was a Shiny dashboard, we had a question about the clinical effectiveness of our behavioral mental health programs. So actually, we had to build a tool to support a team of scientists that were looking at clinical effectiveness. Those are like health systems researchers, and it was a fairly large cohort, and also a lot of different ways to create outcomes for it, filter by different subpopulations. And because again, this is an observational kind of question, or we're comparing kids who are in our programs versus kids who are not, we had to do some propensity weighting to actually balance those comparisons. So we built a Shiny dashboard that can do a lot of that analysis kind of end to end on the fly, like get that data out of our clinical data warehouses and process that. So that, for example, is a script that runs on a schedule, publishes a pin on Posit Connect. Then on top of that, there's a Shiny dashboard that does the kind of cohort visualization, and then also runs these analysis on the fly so they can get their answers more quickly and then download output that they can use for their research. This one example of use of Shiny. Again, we wouldn't use Shiny for any old dashboard. There's teams that can handle that. Like there's teams that develop in your traditional BI tools like Click and actually now Power BI. But yeah, Shiny is there for these more specialized uses. So that's all the R side of the house. For Python, I think most of our ML work, especially when it comes to the deployment and evaluation of models, um, happens in Python. And then, we used to run Jupyter notebooks, but I think now with positron and with Quarto, I think it's actually become easier to achieve the same kind of very rich interactive output that you would get from the things we would do in R. Yeah, we use notebooks and then also various like, you know, develop our own kind of libraries for the ML kind of work. Um, and yeah, and finally, I think for creating some applications that are more Python based, we've been dabbling more in Streamlit for anything that's like a chatbot. I'm actually interested in trying more of that in Shiny, but yeah, because that was a Python-based kind of product, we opted for Streamlit. Um, I mean, to recap, like a lot of data visualization, a lot of notebooks, everything is source controlled. Things that need to go to stakeholders go on Connect. Pins are wonderful. I rely on them a lot. And then the other key thing is getting the data in from a SQL database connection usually.
Okay, perfect. Um, I wanted to hop over to Slido as we have questions coming in and see if Noor could get us started with her question. We'll ask Noor to unmute. And don't forget that you can read questions before you ask them and upvote any that you like. I
Hello,
will
can
put,
people hear me?
yay, hey Noor.
Hi. Uh, apologize for the overly verbose nature of this question, but so you're in predictive AI, and particularly in like clinical decision making and that type of sphere. And one of the issues with clinical and medicine data is often systemic bias. Already in adults, and now you're also working with pediatric patients. And when AI and ML tools are trained on biased data, they often recapitulate that same bias. So given that you're in the sort of clinical decision-making sphere with predictive AI, how are you accounting for that, or can you effectively account for that and so forth?
Yeah, that's a great question. When we talk about fairness and bias and kind of responsible AI. You know, there's certain things we can do to at least measure or be aware of um, our models performing like adequately in all the different subgroups that we want to compare, like some disadvantaged groups. Um, so the one thing we do whenever we have a model is like when we run our evaluations, we do it by different demographic groups, just to make sure there's that parity in model performance. As far as like quantifying bias and doing something about it at like the root cause level, we've had some projects that were more focused on health equity and at least kind of surfacing that there are inequities using some more vigorous approach to measure that. But I'd say as far as like eradicating bias from our data, that's a pretty difficult challenge. And yeah, the best we do so far is just measuring performance by groups.
Awesome. Thank you, Noor, for your question. I am going to hop over to Slido again and ask Russ to hop in. Russ Conti, if you are available to ask your question live, that would be amazing. And I will put it in the chat for everybody.
Okay. Hi, thanks. This sounds like a really interesting lot of work you're doing. Can you speak to the differences between working with data about children versus working with data about adults?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think um, just the general difference in pediatrics versus adult medicine is it's more complicated. Like there is just there can be a lot more nuances. And for example, if you're looking at creating certain features for risk prediction, you have to be aware that when, for example, some lab is out of range or something is considered to be abnormal, is going to have a lot more different thresholds just because kids change or they grow. So there's more age stratification goes into our population, although they have a smaller age range, right? That's one kind of obvious challenge with data. And then in general, just how as far as like difficulties in prediction, for example, no-shows or like clinic no-shows, more challenging in pediatrics because the decision to come to an appointment is not just the child's decision. And so we don't really get to see in our electronic health record and in our most of our data is about the child, not the parent or the family or their environment. So um, and then clinically, I think pediatrics can be more challenging and complex for some things. So, for example, some of the critical things that might happen for somebody that's admitted to a hospital, like deteriorating or decompensating things like cardiac arrests or sepsis, tend to be harder to recognize and move faster than in adults. So yeah, I guess these are just some of the challenges I can think of now. But caveat, I've not really worked with adult data that much. Yeah.
That is totally okay. All right,
Sorry,
we have
I felt
questions.
that.
We It's okay. We have questions coming into the Slido that I am looking at right now. Bear with me as I take a look at everything. But I wanted to ask just an anonymous one that had popped up as well, which was, does your team use SAS at all? And how does that tie into the open source work? Um,
Um, we used to be a SaaS shop. I think like maybe it's been over 5 years since there's no more SaaS support in the organization. And yeah, I'd say a lot of our, at least two of our data scientists, like they were in public health, they were trained in SaaS as well. We have other people in healthcare that are used to working in SaaS, but we've been like, we're not supporting it, and for better or worse, I'd say. I've always been more R, and actually Stata was the one software that I used when I started my career in undergrad. So um, yeah, the challenge with enterprise settings is again like these licenses do become quite costly, and it's hard to justify them if you are only going to have like a handful of people using it.
right, absolutely. Well, let's head over to another question in Slido, which is anonymous, which is, do you use tidy models and tools like parsnip?
Um, I should. To be fair, for a lot of our predictive models, we were out of the R game. So I've used tidy models and I've used Carrot before that. I think it's very powerful, even actually not just for prediction, but just like statistical inference. If you gotta scale models, tidy models is great. The problem is there's still kind of a steep learning curve, and then if our deployments are all happening in Python and all that, then um, it's sort of better to make the switch earlier. So yeah, but I think tidy models is pretty powerful, and some other folks on my team have used tidy models as well. I've used H2O a lot as well for machine learning and kind of getting started on some kind of quicker initial checks. So yeah, that's been another tool that I've enjoyed. But
Awesome. Thank you so much, anonymous question asker. I would love to hop over to Hubert's question. Hubert, if you are available to ask that live, that would be great. And I will put it in the chat for everybody.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I work for the University of Chicago, and my group runs the pediatric cancer data commons, among other things, but we deal with EHR data and, study data, all that kind of stuff. My first question is, do you have access to internal LLMs of some flavor that you can use with PHI or sensitive data? We really don't have that. There is a AI available that is our own University of Chicago AI, but we don't have an API that you could do sort of the other than chatting with it, you can't do any sort of linking it with Elm or anything like that. So that's one question. And the other question is a follow-up. Do you pull most of your data from something like Clarity, or do you have various data warehouses based on OMOP or other models that the data gets
Mhm.
pulled from, in a warehouse or lake house, or what does the data landscape look like for you? That's my
Yeah,
questions.
thanks for great questions. Yeah, the LLMs, I'd say that's generally a challenge in healthcare. Like you really can't use a lot of the same technologies you use outside because of concerns over PHI and HIPAA compliance. So for us, we do have on our Azure subscription, there is a deployment of of OpenAI models that we can use that is HIPAA compliant. So that's enabled us to do a lot, and it's probably been like 2-ish years since it happened. But yeah, for example, coding assistants and GitHub Copilot, those are outside of that. So that was a big deal being able to use those. And we have to take a lot of precautions to make sure PHIs don't leak with those. But as far as like putting data through LLMs, like we have that ability, and that's opened up a lot of these doors to do some of those custom LLM based applications that I mentioned earlier. Um, and also, yeah, Elmer actually has been a great way to kind of integrate that with R and even Shiny dashboards. Your other question about data landscape, yes. So the data warehouses that you mentioned, Clarity and Caboodle, those are basically the what Epic, like the biggest EHR vendor, and what we use. It's where the data goes for reporting. So Clarity is basically it's not exactly the data warehouse, but it's where more of the raw data for reporting goes. And Caboodle is a little bit more groomed and has a star schema. It's neater, easier to work with. So yes, we use both. We also use some of our enterprise data that comes from systems like Workday. Um, so those are kind of the main big enterprise data sources. And they're beasts. Like Epic is just an enormous application. There's like literally there's hundreds of thousands of tables in Clarity. So being able to navigate those kinds of relational databases is definitely some of the specialization that you get from healthcare data science, at least on the provider side that we're on. And yeah, I think Caboodle has made life a little bit easier for some of our data pools, but sometimes for more complicated things where you need to know when something happened and you need to get all the history, you need to go into the more complex kind of databases. I'll say we have a big, very capable team that does our clinical reporting that are trained in Clarity and Caboodle, so we can lean on them. But being self-reliant and knowing how to do basic data pools is great. Um, OMOP basically a standardized data model that's very great for creating cohorts. So Children's does have a lot of our data mapped. And again, that's the special part there is you have to map your Epic data to use these common data models. Otherwise, they stop being common. So but again, OMOP is more of a reporting or more of a research tool, so we haven't really leaned very heavily on it. Yeah, a lot of times we need something that needs to have more recent data. And there's already a day lag with how things go into these data warehouses. With OMOP, it's a little bit longer for us as well. So
All right, awesome. Hubert, thank you so much for your question. And there were some people in the chat saying thank you for asking that one because it really hit home for them as well, which I love. Next, I would love it if Lolu could unmute and ask his question. And for everyone unmuting Lolu, his name is Jabril in Zoom, I think, if you want to be able to find him.
Oh, I might need help, Libby.
That's okay. Yeah, let me look. There he is. All right.
Yes, I think, yes. Can you hear me now?
Hey, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. Thank you so much, Nicholas, so far. I think my question is mainly based on, the difficulty in interacting or presenting data science workflow to non-technical people. So usually when you use advanced techniques in your workflow, are there particularly any explainable ML outputs or data science visualizations that you've used to improve stakeholder buy-in from the non-technical individuals and clinicians? And is there which of these projects that you've been on do you think has been the most impactful for the organization? Sorry, could you hear me?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Yes, yes. So as far as like making some of our outputs more accessible, I'd say broadly that's what R is so great for because you can create really powerful custom data visualization. So for our ML models, for example, one thing that we've done for model evaluation is when a model was developed, there's a lot of, usually do this in a notebook, but explaining what your model performance really looks like is something that we've used Shiny for, and it's been really powerful to actually be able to show. So here's a classifier. These are all the features in it. This is how your feature importance looks. So if we need to select between different models, that really helps kind of get stakeholder buy-in to be able to show from all the different things that we've experimented with. We're able to track our experiments and then show the feature importance and essentially what cohorts and different how are these different features constructed. So yeah, that's more custom data visualization we can do in Shiny. Also, the other part of for a classifier, for example, is um, these ML models are not the end thing that a user sees. They're just part of a bigger solution that, in the case of clinical decision support, that goes into the EHR. That's something that you can think of it as a just another test or just another lab result or something, right? So to actually act on this, we need to build things in the EHR, for example, an alert that uses that prediction. So to decide when to display an alert, we need to know at what threshold does the predicted risk score have to trigger that alert. So Shiny's been great for showing the different trade-offs. For example, if we show a clinician a precision and recall curve, we can say, if you choose to implement at this threshold, then your alert is going to fire this many times, and out of all the times that somebody, for example, had sepsis, this is how many you would be able to detect. So we can show them what their sensitivity looks like in their cohort. We can show them what their precision looks like. And that's been really important for making some implementation decisions, right? Um, so yeah, I think our what we call our model evaluation dashboards have been very instrumental in getting buy-in and explaining our models. Um, and then um, I think that there was one more question that I'm so I'm forgetting now, but
It's okay. I think you answered a lot of them. Um, I think that we can head over to an anonymous question in Slido, which has risen to the top. Y'all go vote for questions in Slido because there's so many. We won't be able to get to them all today. Nikolai, there's so many questions for you in Slido. Um, but yeah, everybody go upvote. And thank you so much for all of the questions that are rolling in. We have an anonymous one that says clinicians often want a straightforward answer, but machine learning methods often produce complex results that are challenging to interpret. So, how do you balance that?
um, the simplicity. So, I mean, I think having explainable models is very important. So, being able to actually have something that's interpretable really comes down to like, sometimes using a simpler model that is maybe less performant gives you a lot of that, at least as a good starting point to show how something is working when we're talking about prediction. And then, um, yeah, I mean, I think the other part is also being engaged with your stakeholders. So um, we're fortunate to have like a very like data savvy group of clinicians that we work with that are often partners in these kind of projects and implementations. So yeah, some of that translation into clinical audiences and like basically it's very important for us to know what the workflow is for somebody that's using these tools in the EHR. And we could not do this in isolation if we're not interacting with the actual end users.
Yep, I love it. As always at the Data Science Hangout, the answer is talk to people more, get to know them more,
Yes, yes.
and empathize with their needs. Awesome, thank you. I have another quick anonymous question, which is what's your favorite project been so far to work on at the pediatric hospital? What a great one.
Mm, I love data visualization. So hmm, I'd say one of my favorites was that behavioral mental health clinical effectiveness project and creating that dashboard that I was describing, where we can sort of do this clinical effectiveness analysis quickly. Um, yeah, just because I had a lot of fun visualizing our cohort. There were a lot of assumptions there on, okay, somebody, clinical data is complex, or the hospital and healthcare visit data is complex. You have a lot of different you have a lot of different interactions with patients. So we have to create some custom visuals to basically show this is how we define our index visit for this cohort. This is how all their other visits look like. This is how they meet or don't meet the definitions. So creating those custom plots was fun for me. Um, as far as like other projects, I think I'm excited for some of the new things we're doing with LLMs. So we have currently a project where we're building a chart review assistant tool. So we're using an LLM where people can bring their data, bring their cohort, and we really underuse data in notes. So far we've said NLP is out of reach. NLP is too hard. There's quicker things we can do with structured data, but a lot of times there's a lot of rich information in notes that people try to get out in a structured way by doing manual chart reviews and putting things in data collection forms. We've been working on a tool that can basically ease that data abstraction burden and give people a first pass at, here is information you can conversationally ask from a node to extract some structured data. So far it's the reason why I'm saying this is one of my favorite projects is people get pretty excited about this. No one likes short reviews, so
Right.
making making people's lives easier it's been satisfying.
Well, that's awesome. I think that that might cover what I remember now is Lolu's other question, which was about your most impactful project.
Oh yeah, there's another yeah, there's another tool that we built. Again, this is more of a Shiny application, but um, so in healthcare quality, a lot of times you want to show whether your process is stable, and then if it's not, if there's some kind of special cause variation or some noise in some metric that you're looking at over time, you want to investigate why that's happening. And also, if you do an intervention and you're tracking your outcome measures, you want to be able to show that there was a change that occurred. So looking at that kind of data over time in statistical process control charts is something that's done a lot in healthcare quality. So for those of you who are statisticians, I don't know, the SPC charts are not really something that we focus on a lot. They're widely used in like manufacturing, for example, but they're also used in healthcare quality improvement. So we created an application that helps people derive those charts. And it's more than just simple data visualization. There's a lot of rules to when something is considered to be a process out of control. So there's various rules about like when you're measuring your process and you derive some what's called a center line, or like what is the average value for example, for time to getting antibiotics. If that average goes up or down, there's different rules that are kind of accepted to be considered special cause variation. So yeah, Shiny was a really great way to actually create an application to make these charts and enable people to do their own measurement for improvement for these quality improvement projects. I'd say that's probably one of our most used dashboards.
That's awesome. Just
So
seeing
yeah, that's SPC
usage go
Charter
up on
is
a
the name of the
dashboard is
tool.
awesome. Very cool. Well, I'm seeing a trend in our Slido questions, and it is about interpretable models, interpretability, um, getting better predictions at the cost of interpretability. So we had another anonymous question about this, and I saw that Arsenis had put a reply in there. Thanks for Arsenis for sharing your experience. I thought I would turn that one to everybody in the chat as well to sort of talk about and give feedback on. The anonymous question says, at my hospital, clinicians usually don't understand the difference between models for prediction and those for explanation, and they balk at the idea that you can often get better predictions at the cost of the interpretability. And they were wondering what your experience of that phenomenon is at the hospital. I know that I've asked you several interpretable model questions already, but I would love to open that up to you, Nikolay, and also open that up to everybody in the chat to share your experiences of it and maybe some tactics for mediating that.
Yeah, I mean, I think explainability is very important when you're making, critical decisions with these models. So that being said, like there's ways to go beyond logistic regressions and make your models explainable. So, there's the more traditional ways of adding explainability to ML models with, SHAP plots and things like this.
I
Um,
literally just put that in the chat. SHAP.
yeah,
That
so
seems
I
to
mean,
be
there's
it.
like
Yeah.
techniques to kind of unblack box some of the more complex models,
Yeah.
even deep learning models. But I think it's also just a culture shift too. My suspicion is that with kind of the advancements in AI, uh, there might be more willingness to embrace a black box approach because, even people who build some of build the LLMs don't exactly aren't able to trace what the billions of parameters like round up to sometimes, right? So there is I think what was true a few years ago with explainability and opting for simpler models is going to change a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I think the other part is having the kind of governance in place where people can trust that if there is a tool going in that is being evaluated and that, you know, you both have considered the workflow that people are using. So you're not just thinking that something is useful to predict because, you've thought about this in isolation, but you've actually sat down with the clinician, seen what they're trying to accomplish and how this algorithm is going to be helpful to them. Um, and then also having the kind of sufficient guardrails around evaluation um, and monitoring for something once it goes live. For
Awesome.
any clinical model, we don't really deploy anything until it's been in this phase of like silent evaluation. So
Okay.
um, something would just have to go silently in the background, and then we would see does it actually work in production because things can be tricky to deploy. You might think that it works well when you're training your model, when you're testing, and then yeah. So moving a little bit more carefully and having these processes in place is critical for buy-in.
Awesome. Well, speaking of silently in the background, your audio just got very, very quiet for us, and I'm not sure why. I'm
Oh, I'm
wondering
sorry.
if
Like,
you perhaps might
yeah,
have
maybe
moved
be a little
away
bit
from your
closer. I
laptop.
forget that I'm using this mic. Yes.
There we go. He's back. Okay, Nikolai's back. Thank you. I didn't want to interrupt you because you were on a roll and talking about such good stuff. Um, thank you. I
We could
have
still
some
hear
other.
you on your answer.
Yes.
We just
Okay, good.
had to like turn the
Okay.
volume up a
It
little
wasn't
bit.
just
Yes.
Now
lip
we can
reading, I
adjust.
hope. Yeah.
No.
Good. Okay.
Yeah, it's okay. We'll fix it in post. We probably won't. It's okay. Okay, let's head back over to Slido and see what other questions we have. We have about 15 minutes left. Thank you, everybody, for your many, many questions in Slido. There is no way we will get to all of them, just so many. I highly encourage you, if you are in the Slido, to go look through questions, and there's a little reply button. If you have a reply for somebody that you would like to add from your own experience, do so there or bring it up in the chat. Um, before we get a little bit further, I wanted to ask a question that we always ask on the Hangout, which is about career advice. Do you have a piece of career advice that you would give your younger self or something you wish that you knew when you were just getting started?
Um, yeah, I mean, I didn't think that I would end up in data science or technology in general. Like I think when I was starting my career in undergrad, I was an econ major. I was interested in research. I was interested in going more into kind of maybe public policy. And then Um, then the first job I had kind of changed my mind around this, and I became very interested in public health. And then that led me more to disease ecology, and like I was interested in antibiotic resistance. And then that led me to Atlanta, where I went in grad school for disease ecology, and again, still the focus was on public health. But yeah, long story short, like you don't really know what you're gonna be when you're in school, and you need to be open to your career kind of evolving as you go along, and mentors are very critical in that. So I think the reason why I went down all these paths was because I had some inspiring like mentors that were both my grad school advisors, my various bosses that I had through my career. So the other advice is, yeah, be open and also don't burn bridges with these people because they will be critical for a lot of your next steps. Um, at Children's as well, I came here after grad school. I left and I worked in other industries and other companies for some time, and then I came back. So again, maintaining those ties with people that you know are part of your growth and your development it's gonna be rewarding later. Um, so yeah, that's kind of the broadest career advice I can give.
No, it's great. I love it. Thank you. Okay, we had a billion questions pile in, and I'm going to go pick one. We had an anonymous question that I wanted to get in because I remember when you attended as an attendee Matt Maloney's at City of Hope's hangout, that you had said like we are also on Epic. We are dealing with a lot of these same things. So this anonymous question is, are you building models in-house or mostly integrating vendor solutions like Epic's AI? Because Matt Maloney, I remember, was like doing a ton of stuff where they were like building things to integrate with Epic. Are you all doing any of that stuff or are you relying on vendor?
No, great question. And also that hangout was awesome.
It was
I really
awesome.
love having some of these healthcare discussions because, yeah, I mean, our field is special, but I think all fields are special, but yeah, but healthcare specifically and vendor models, like we do both. It's often great to start with something that's already available to you. So a lot of these models that are out of the box in Epic are maybe a good first pass. In pediatrics, in our case, and also in Matt's case, and in cancer, like maybe there just aren't enough that are specific to your population. So most of the Epic models tend to be on adults, and maybe they've done some stuff for pediatrics. So we have to build a lot of this on our own. So there's a lot of considerations around, um, you know, what are the use cases that you want to pick to develop on your own? Because with a small team and constrained resources, there's there's always infinite demand for some of these things. But yeah, I'd say we do a good blend of trying something that's maybe gonna work, seeing if it does, and then if not, we go and we customize. We also have some research partnerships with institutions like Georgia Tech or Emory. So there's a kind of a third outside ver or a third way to get stuff in for us, and that's some of these collaborations we have.
All right. I have another question here. This is a spicy one. How do you get buy-in for pro shiny when there is free shiny?
Well, there's no option for free shiny for us because we're in an enterprise. So to be able to actually deploy some of these things, they really need to be um, on a kind of vetted application that IS&T supports. So I think just the nature of doing things like at an institution at a certain size, you really don't have the option of going with the free open source version. And of course, we are using a lot of open source software and packages, but the kind of critical parts of the scaffolding around those, like Posit Connect's been amazing, and all the actual Posit products are, um, you know, they're basically the stack that we lead on the most for my team.
Right, yeah. It's hard to do everything by yourself sometimes, and I think that's that's the thing maybe people in leadership don't always understand is like, oh, well, there's a lot of like switchboarding behind the scenes to get a completely free, completely open source solution implemented at scale in an organization. And like that's the benefit of the service stuff.
Yeah, and it always takes some kind of proof of concept to show
Right.
people. So having the open source tools
Prove
is a great
value.
way to get it in the door. So
Yeah.
it was years ago that we built our first Shiny app, and it was for analyzing US News World Report rankings. Hospitals care a lot about those. So that
Aha.
got
Okay.
leadership attention. So that was one where like, oh, you know what? We can't really do these in ClickSense or in like I think we had SAS Visual Analytics at the time. So um yeah, sometimes you have to make the case for it and put the extra time in, but um,
Awesome. Well, I have a question here from Ruby. Ruby, if you are able to ask your question live, I will highlight it in Slido. There's Ruby. Hey, Ruby.
Hey, I'm actually also at Emory. I'm a postdoc in the Department of Epidemiology. And so I'm curious because we don't have that many public health adjacent speakers here, whether you can speak to the experience of kind of transitioning into a more data science role from public health, either from your experience or that of your people on your team, and what's made that kind of easier, or what are some of the hurdles that you've encountered? Thanks.
yeah, that's a great question. I mean, yeah, so many angles to start from, but I think from like kind of like the quantitative skills, like number one, like if you're in epidemiology, there's a lot of kind of rigor around working with data and with numbers that directly can be leveraged in a data science career. Particularly when I started, or sorry, when I moved to more from research to data science, there really weren't that many programs that would formally train you in like and people were getting, I don't know, an MIS degree or like Masters in Information Science and so on, but there was quite a bit of openness to coming from different fields. And I think for public health, um, the thinking of, around like, you know, scientific thinking and also biostats and epi kind of quantitative rigor lends itself well to the biggest. I think that's one of the steepest parts of the curve is like learning these tools, or sorry, learning the methods. As far as like programming, just kind of the other big part of data science is like, can you turn your analyses into something actionable and something that is repeatable? Um, Again, I think compared to a decade ago, like using tools like Quarto or Markdown is kind of a basic starting point, and they're great for research, but they also have kind of the basic premise of making sure your code is reproducible. So, um, just scripting to do statistical analysis is one thing, but making something truly repeatable, both like for replicating your findings, but also to translate to your other projects is a big part of data science, right? Um, and then as far as like actually transitioning in terms of culture shift, I think healthcare was a great place for me at that point because there is a lot of understanding about, you're still working with people that are been through the biosciences, right? So I find it easier to talk to people that are clinical and if you're coming from public health because they have a lot of understanding, respect, and similar foundation knowledge. Um, and then, if you go further, I think the trade-off is like if you go more into technology, for example, my once I moved out of healthcare, I went into more like more the insurance side of things, or it was more payer. You get kind of a deeper understanding of technology there because they have different data challenges. So I think that was important, but you lose some of that connection with people around the way of thinking, the kind of shared mental models around hypothesis testing, for example, or um, just the mission and values appreciation as well. But you learn a lot of other things. So Um,
Always a
yeah.
trade-off.
Yeah. And the other part I would say LLMs have made it much easier with coding also to create production grade code, or maybe not quite production grade code, but to cross that barrier into I don't know how to program. So maybe that looks very different now than for someone making that call like 10 years ago to go
Right.
into data science
It's a different world now. Ruby, that was such a great question.
every
I want to
day.
thank you for asking that. So we have about 4 minutes left. I want to call out in the chat. We have two Russes, not one, two Russes, talking about how wonderful Children's Healthcare of Atlanta is. So just letting you know that there's love happening in the chat. And then let's hop back over to Slido to ask our most popular and upvoted question, if we can, in 3 minutes. This is a fraught question, y'all. Why do you tend to favor Python over R for deploying models?
Um, yeah, so one of the reasons is to deploy some of the stuff in Epic, it has to be in Python. There's just no supported R runtime. So the other reason is, I think broadly there's a lot of like tools out there that are maybe offer better support for Python, like MLflow being one example. MLflow is a tool to log your experiments and track them. They do have an R API, but the Python one is always a step ahead. So for a lot of the engineering work, I mean, talent is also another consideration. There's just more in Python to draw from. Um, and some of that hurts me because I personally love doing the data wrangling and analysis and visualization in R, but um, yeah. I mean, I think you can do things in any language, and you have to just have a team that is enabled to do their best in both, or in whatever works for them. So um, for us, it happens to be Python for the ML work.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. We have 3 minutes left, so maybe we can pop one more question in there. Um, and it is from Noor, but I'm going to read it in the interest of time. How has the rise of agentic AI coding, such as Claude Code, played into your day-to-day workflow, if at all?
Short answer has been more limited in part because we can't really, a lot of our environment when it comes to data that's loaded in it is can be sensitive. So
Right.
we've been pretty careful with how we use coding assistants. Broadly though, coding assistants like code completion and just being able to ask questions in our HIPAA compliant instances has been like a huge productivity boost. But the agentic coding where we'll just do more things with your code is something we're just beginning to tap into.
I don't think you're alone in that. I think that there are lots and lots of organizations who are working with sensitive data who are still navigating how agentic coding works with all kinds of private info and sensitive info. Well, thank you so much, Nikolai. This was so much fun. I will shout out Noor. Thank you so much for giving resources on SHAP and Lime in the chat for everybody today. We talked a lot about SHAP and interpretability in the chat. Um, Shout out to Arsonist for the very cool Positron t-shirt. Thank you everyone for asking such amazing questions. I will make sure that Nikolai gets this list of unanswered questions. I'm going to send him this Slido so he can look at them. Nikolai, no, you don't have to go in and answer all of them or anything, but just in case you're wondering what you're missing out on and have some FOMO, everybody say thank you to Nikolai in the chat. We have had such a good time talking with you today. I hope that you will enjoy the week off next week while we were in California. Don't forget, no hangout next week. But do get with Isabella if you would like to talk about getting together in person in the Chicagoland area, okay?
Libby,
Thank
I
you so
wanted
much.
to share just real quickly
Yeah.
to remind people about the Glimpse newsletter, but also to give a shout out to Isabella because she's the new editor of the monthly Glimpse newsletter. And
Yay.
so there's a lot of awesome updates on packages, Posit AI, and so much in that. So I just want to make sure I shared it in the chat.
Awesome. Yay, Isabella. We love Isabella. We stan Isabella. We have so many thank yous coming in the chat here. Zach says, sorry, not sorry for asking you so many questions. I'll get those to you. All right,
And
everybody.
and I see just a few questions about, is there a way to email or save the chat if you're on mobile? If anybody wants it and is on mobile, let us know in the chat and we could send it to you too if you
Yeah, and
can't get it.
if you're on the Discord server, head over to the Data Science Hangout channel, and we can pop it there as a text file as well. Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you, everybody. If you want to save the chat and you're on a desktop, top right hand corner, there are three dots that you can click, and you can save the chat. All right, everybody. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Have a wonderful weekend. Bye.